Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is Laura Scanlan at the NEA, and I'm the Director of State and Regional Partnerships, and I'll be moderating our webinar today. Just by way of background, the NEA just released a number of extensive research reports that look at the arts and cultural sector from three different angles: how the arts contribute to the U.S. economy, how Americans participate in the arts, and motivations and barriers to attending the arts. I have with me today Sunil Iyengar, NEA's Director of Research and Analysis, who will provide some insights of this research and some ideas as to what states and regions might make of all this research. So, just a little housekeeping items before we get started. I want you to know that we've muted you all, so you'll only be able to hear the two of us. Following Sunil's presentation, we'll have a Q&A session, roughly 15 to 20 minutes. So throughout the webinar, you can submit questions and comments at any time through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address as many questions as we can. So please don't use the raise hand button. That's the only advice I have in terms of Q&A. And at the end of this session, or soon afterwards, we'll send you a link to the webinar and the PowerPoint. So you have that available to share with those in your staff or council who may not have been able to participate today. With that, I'm very happy now to turn it over to my colleague Sunil Iyengar, NEA's Director of Research and Analysis.
Thank you, Laura. And I want to thank Laura and her staff and also Sally Gifford from our Office of Public Affairs for coordinating this and for also even fielding the survey, anything to promote research. So thanks a lot. I look forward to sharing with you in greater detail what we know about the topics listed here. So our chairman, Jane Chu, has noted elsewhere that the NEA is the only federal agency to conduct periodic analyses of the value and impact of the arts in American life. That's the job of the Office of Research and Analysis at the NEA, to bring rigorous methods and nationally representative data to these questions, to make the otherwise intangible tangible, so we can measure and articulate these benefits as a society. So speaking of measuring the intangible, when the president's budget came out earlier this month, I'm sure we all turned immediately to the number for the NEA and other cultural agencies. But some of us, research analysts, were, I think, pleased to see the arts turn up in another context, in a supplemental document under the heading of social indicators that the White House Office of Management and Budget deems worth tracking. Yes, I'm here to tell you that arts participation is one of these indicators. And in describing the trends observed through historical data, the report states, new modes of cultural engagement have emerged, with the implication that the times are changing in how we consider the arts and creativity in terms of traditional delivery systems. Now, where did OMB get its numbers on cultural engagement from? So happens it's from the NEA's Survey of Public Participation in the Arts. This survey has been conducted periodically with the U.S. Census Bureau since 1982. In January, we released a report profiling a decade of arts participation from 2002 to 2012 as tracked by our survey. Although we've been conducting the survey on and off for over 30 years, we have ability to report trend data, that is, changes over time, for only a limited subset of questions on the survey. And again, it's an adult survey. That's because those questions have remained consistent in all years of the survey. Apart from our questions on reading, books, and literature, the questions that I'm talking about now are known as, quote, benchmark items. Not because they speak to a higher standard of quality associated with the art forms they represent, but because they have been used over the decades as a kind of index for arts participation rates across the country. The benchmark items specifically ask if, not counting performances in elementary or high school, adults have attended one of the following types of event: jazz or classical music performances, ballet, opera, musical plays, non-musical plays, or whether they visited an art museum or gallery. They are counted if they did at least one of these activities once or more in a 12-month period. Here's what we see. After hovering at around 40% of all adults who said yes to those questions in the first few years of the survey, we were down to 35% in 2008, which scared some people, and then down even further to 33% in 2012. The declines, I should say, were particularly steep for whites, for middle-aged Americans, that is 35 to 55 years old, and across various really different education levels. I will note, however, an important caveat that older adults, either 65 and older or 75 and older, were the only demographic group for which we noted increases in attending various kinds of arts events captured here. Now, that would have been the whole story if we focused exclusively on arts attendance for these select activities. But in fact, the SPPA, the survey, always has asked about personal creation and performance, arts participation via media, and a range of other activities. Many of those questions have changed year to year, so we don't really have great trend data for a lot of that. But in 2012, we decided to consult with, for 2012, we decided to consult with internal and external stakeholders, as well as survey methodologists, statisticians, cultural policy researchers, and others, to figure out how could we broaden the array of questions to include on the survey to get at other and different types of arts participation. Here's what we found. First, one thing you start to realize looking at the survey results is that the number of people who take part in arts and cultural activities is actually quite large. In 2012, about 71% of the US adult population, that's 167 million Americans, did some kind of arts activity through electronic media. Well over half read books or literature, that is, a novel, short story, poem, or play, even though the numbers for reading in these individual categories have either held flat or waned over the past 10 years. And just over half attended some kind of visual exhibit, arts exhibit, or performing arts event. And I should note this 51% figure is broader, includes a broader range of arts activities, any kind of music, dance, or theater or performance, for example, not just the art forms I named earlier. Now, I've just said this is a periodic survey and we have trend data going back to 1982, but consider, back in the good old 80s or even the 90s, could we have imagined the proliferation of some of the media and technologies through which people are now enjoying and experiencing art of all kinds? For example, 44% of adults, that's 103 million, emailed, posted, or otherwise shared art using technology, and another 43% created, performed, or edited or remixed art. And one of the things we're finding when we review the past decade is that technology is a great enabler of arts creation. Demographic subgroups that previously have shown relatively low rates of participation when measured by arts attendance, for example, are lighting up when it comes to the use of electronic media to create or perform art of their own. We could look at this by age, race, or socioeconomic status. Let's look at race. For example, among all American adults who created works of visual art in 2012, nearly two-thirds of African Americans used electronic media to do so. That compares with half of white Americans, non-Hispanic white Americans. At the same time, Asian Americans and other non-Hispanic groups were also relatively likely to use electronic media to create visual art. When it comes to music making through creation or performance, again, African Americans who did so were the most likely of all groups to have used electronic media for this purpose, but a close second is Hispanic Americans. Another benefit of the survey is that we now have a much more substantial wave of millennials in our data than in previous years. So for the first time with this group, we're seeing higher rates of arts education being reported by adults 18 to 24 years of age. We believe that's what's behind this aggregate figure here for these three art forms. This is the percent of US adults total who reported ever taking an arts class or lesson in the course of their lives. And you see that there are increases over the 2002 year for music, visual art, and creative writing courses. But if you look particularly at 18 to 24-year-olds who report ever having taken an arts class or lesson in school or out of school, and by the way, I would just say that memory is obviously fallible, but for 18 to 24-year-olds, we would hope that they have the reliability of what they're reporting in terms of their school experience, since they're so close to it, is going to hold up more than maybe for some older populations. And here we are, in fact, seeing that the 18 to 24-year-olds of 2012 are reporting much higher rates of having had an arts class or lesson than those 10 years ago. Now, I'd submit that much of this rise is partly attributable to the work of community-based arts organizations and educators who strive to reach children and youth who may not have access to arts ed in their schools, because many of us know, certainly anecdotally and through some data, that there doesn't seem to, certainly hasn't been a growth in arts offerings in schools, and maybe even declines in some specific areas, like dance and theater, for example. But we need more research to examine this. Now, I just want to note that, as you'll hear, these slides will be available later on our website. So I'm going to kind of go fairly quickly through these relative to regional and state estimates of arts participation rates. This comes from from the SPPA, the Survey of Public Participation in the Arts. But again, the slides will be there for people to look at, but I'll try to point out some interesting things in the next few slides. So just one thing right off the bat is because even with a very relatively large sample size, about 17,000 adults who responded that were sampled for those questions I referred to, we can only get coverage for about 32 states and 11 metro areas when you drill down. We have very good regional coverage by U.S. Census region, and of course, as you've seen, we have national data. But to get down into states is a trickier proposition. I'd be happy to answer some questions about that later, but know that we feel good about, and Census has assured us about the reliability of the 32 states for which we do have the data. And here you see them in red. So let's go up to regions, since we do have good regional representation with these data. Let's stick only with arts attendance for the purpose of time here, although again, all this will be posted online, and I'll direct you to other resources as well. First of all, New England, the Pacific region, and the mountain regions show the highest overall rates of arts participation relative to the rest of the nation. Also, East North Central region, interestingly enough, in that region, people were more likely than in the other regions to attend arts in elementary or high schools as venues, elementary, middle school, high schools. West North Central, that region, in addition to a few others, was people were more likely to have attended the arts in parks or in parks or outdoor venues. That's another thing we're able to tell with the survey is not only what kinds of art forms they attended, or what activities they attended, but where did those activities take place. And also, this is generally true nationwide, typically partly because of the concentration of arts venues, formal arts venues, particularly in traditional arts venues in cities and metro areas relative to rural areas. You typically see higher rates of attendance associated with those metro areas. But in fact, for craft fairs, you found that non-metro residents or rural residents actually had relatively high rates of attendance. That would be something one would infer, but it's there in the data as well. See here. And if people want to know more about the regions and how they break out, I'm happy to answer that. So what are some other interesting findings? Well, when you move away from attendance, what you find is that actually in terms of arts creation, the fiber arts, textiles, most popular in the West North Central region, New England, and the mountain regions. Leatherwork, metalwork, woodwork, meanwhile, are particularly popular in East, South Central, and West North Central United States. And again, non-metro residents did these activities at least as much as metro residents. Now we move to states. One of the things I'll just point out off the bat again is that Colorado seems to have earned the highest rates of arts attendance across the board pretty much relative to many other states. Actually, Latin music, you'll note California, New York, and Florida were the leaders there. But for most of these art forms, in terms of attendance, the rates are very high in Colorado relative to the other states. Wherever I've listed a state, that means it's higher than the national average. And when it comes to non-performing arts, or rather visual arts, for those first three bullets there, again, you see Colorado, Oregon, some other states as well for historic or design tours, that is to say historic sites or places, architectural tours or visits of neighborhoods for historic or design purposes. And finally, what we see here, though not featuring Colorado, is visual performing arts attendance at a place of worship. So, temples, mosques, churches, synagogues. We find that actually Nebraska, Minnesota, North Carolina, and Alabama seem to come out ahead in terms of the share of adults who go to those places for arts. So that's, again, some of the stuff the data can tell you. If you're asking me why Colorado, or for that matter, why some of these states popping up relative to the other states, we did an analysis and we found that when you control for a variety of factors, even the concentration of arts venues in that state, but also accounting for race, ethnicity, age, a variety of demographic variables, we find that the most significant predictor seemed to be whether these people in these states had reported high degrees of arts education or exposure to the arts as a child. So in fact, and I'll just say Colorado also leads the way in terms of the share of adults who said they experienced an arts event as a child. So especially when we controlled for these other variables like education level and so on, which is often a proxy for income, we feel that that there is something to that early exposure, which of course would make sense and I hope resonate with many of you. So happy to talk more about this, but I want to kind of glance through the state findings. There's a lot there, as you can imagine. And you can actually find it all on our website. We have a feature called Arts Data Profile number 5. We do a series of these where it shows you in as painless way as possible detailed tables and the like and graphics showing you what we know, in this case about states' participation in the arts, and also our national report and some apps and other goodies that are on our website. So quickly, let's move to the second report. To shift gears for a moment, this is When Going Gets Tough, Barriers and Motivations Affecting Arts Attendance. As we've just discussed, attending museums, galleries, art exhibits, and live music, dance, or theater performances are just some of the varied ways that Americans get their art. But as a national funder of some of the leading providers of art exhibits and events, we naturally wanted to know why people choose to go to certain arts events, what motivates them, and importantly, what holds them back. So, just to show you what this shows you, if you'll remember, um, we saw from the other survey about 50% or so attended a live visual arts or performing arts event in the last year. Well, this is a separate survey using the General Social Survey, which is again another large-scale nationally representative study. And what this tells you is roughly the same, 54% in this survey reported having gone to one of those kinds of events in the last year. However, when you break it down, that turns out to be about 46% who attended live performances, 33% who attended art exhibits, and with an overlap there of about 25%. So we went further into that group and found that the top motivations they gave for attending these events were quite interesting. It turns out that the topmost motivation cited by people who attended an arts event in the last year, again, those 50% of Americans, is socializing with family and friends, with three out of four people who attended the arts naming this as their reason for going. When you think about the arts, it shouldn't be a surprise, but it's impressive to see the number. We do know that through some of our own research and studies from the behavioral and social sciences that arts participation is closely linked with social and civic engagement, and that some art venues, for example, fairs and festivals, are particularly conducive to this outcome. But we also see that the place where the arts is exhibited or performed makes a huge difference. Especially when we talk about the phenomenon of creative placemaking, I think it was interesting to see that the whole 66%, about two-thirds, said that the reason they went to the event was to go to that particular location. As a third rationale or reason for attending, vying with high-quality art as a motivating factor, we see that gaining knowledge or learning something new is an important value for those who attend arts events. Let's look at this broken down by type of arts event. The point of this is to show you that you get different answers when you ask about museum visitors versus performance goers about what motivates them. For people who saw an exhibit, learning new things and experiencing high quality art, and the location itself played a bigger role than they did for performance goers. Meanwhile, socializing and enjoying the work of a specific artist were the big draws for people who went to see performances. And this is basically bears it out by who actually, what did they act, so we just saw what they said was a motivation. When you ask them, did you actually go with anyone? Because we saw socialization, for example, was a big motivation in arts attendance. We find that that's true also by that variable. So in fact, if you look at art exhibits, the largest share of people going to any type of arts performance or arts activity are those who go to art exhibits, the largest share who went alone or with close family members only. And so that's again compelling that maybe going to art exhibits, people go for different reasons than they do for performing arts, and maybe we can harness that knowledge to spur audience development. Why does any of this matter unless you're a sociologist? Well, we've seen that throughout the last several decades of our arts participation survey that adults are attending certain kinds of arts events, classical music, jazz, opera, ballet, theater, and visiting art museums at far lower rates than they used to. So as I just said with the words audience development, we can provide a service, hopefully, to the nation's cultural providers by showing them what drives people to attend or not to attend. And here's one thing we learned. 13% of all adults, that's 31 million Americans, expressed an interest in attending some specific arts event in the past year, but they made the ultimate decision not to go. Understanding those folks is key to expanding cultural engagement nationwide. So what are the barriers? Well, two out of the top three are lack of time, often because of work, the price of admission, and difficulty accessing the site of the exhibit or performance. So I guess that's the third one. In some cases, because of disability or illness. We know that many arts organizations and funders are doing what they can to hold down costs of the ticket, and that free or subsidized programs are often part of the equation. Note that the cost issue here is reported as more of a concern for performance goers than for exhibit viewers, probably because many museums offer discounted or free admission. Also, it's significant that lack of time is more of a factor for not attending exhibits than it is for not attending performances. Interestingly, a large share of young parents or people with very young children fall into this category, which explains the need perhaps for more family-friendly arts programming. But I'd like to also amplify two other points. We've just learned through asking about reasons people give for arts attendance that the location of the event and the people they go with are especially important to them. Well, then it's also true that these very qualities deemed essential to the arts experience are deficient in cases where people choose not to attend. That is, either they couldn't find someone to go with, or they found the location too difficult to get to, in some cases because of a disability. Again, it's easy to view these as opportunities for cultural providers to restructure some of the formats and styles of arts presentation. I'm just going to gloss over this. This is an interesting finding, which is in our report as well. The survey goes through a lot of different variables, so you can mix and match ways you analyze the data. And one of the things we found, which is somewhat interesting, is what are some value statements of people who say who went to arts events, or even who had a desire to go to arts events. So the survey actually asks people about a variety of value statements that they identify with. And it turns out that devotion and loyalty were overwhelmingly the top value, if you will, for people who attended arts activities, even over some of these other values here. And they were also pretty high for those who were interested in attending arts events. You'll see different things, like, for example, being creative, original. Clearly, people who attended those arts events were clearly resonated with that statement more than those who didn't, or even those who wanted to go but didn't. So this is just to give you a taste of what the report can tell you if you want to talk about segmentation, not only in terms of motivations, but also of attitudes and behaviors. So again, as with the other study, we have a lot of neat resources. This one is actually an interactive tool that lets you plug in basically click on various attributes and understand how people may be disposed or not disposed to go to arts events. And the questionnaire itself is on our website as well. Now, finally, I want to turn to the third group of research findings we've just released. So far, we've been talking about arts participation in one sense, but what about participation in the cultural and creative economies? We've joined forces with the Bureau of Economic Analysis at the Department of Commerce, the same folks who bring you the nation's GDP numbers every quarter, so we can get a finer read on the total economic contributions of the arts. Working with them, we established what's called a satellite account on arts and cultural production. Arts and cultural industries in this country make up nearly $700 billion, almost three-quarters of a trillion in gross domestic product, which is, of course, the final economic value of all goods and services in this country. That's a very respectable 4.32% of the U.S. GDP. Key drivers of this growth are broadcasting, movies and videos, publishing, arts and cultural retail trade, the creative component of advertising, but also performing arts and independent artists, which themselves contribute about $35 billion to our GDP. Now, together, these are nearly all service industries, which underscores the notion that the arts are embedded in what we call the ideas or innovation-based economy. Further, it so happens that half of the economic value generated by the nation's copyright-intensive industries, that's a term used by the U.S. Patents and Trademark Office, half of that economic value, or $433 billion, comes from the production of arts and cultural commodities. So we actually show you here in this slide how if you look at the dark blue bar, it shows you how the value added to GDP from arts and culture stacks up with other industries. And as you can see, it's more than construction, transportation, warehousing, travel, tourism, utilities, and others. One thing I'd like to note, and again, there's plenty more on our website, detailed tables, graphs, and issue briefs, is that unlike many other sectors, and indeed the U.S. economy at large, arts and cultural industries are in aggregate running a trade surplus. That is, we're exporting about $25 billion more than we're currently importing. Trade surpluses are linked to job growth and economic growth generally. Viewed from another angle, they suggest a high degree of appreciation for American or homegrown arts beyond our shores. Finally, as a service to the public, scholars, policymakers, cultural providers, we've created, as I said, the series called the Arts Data Profile Series, which takes you to the data set and some visualizations and summary statistics. We're trying to upgrade this in the next few months to make it a little more snappy, user-friendly. And this particular one on arts and cultural production satellite account has a series of issue briefs on various topics ranging from workers, or actually 4.7 million workers in this industry, in these industries, to tax exempt, nonprofit arts organizations, how they fit in there, arts education, and other topics. And we also have established an archive, the National Archive of Data on Arts and Culture, which if you Google or go to our website and then link to this, will give you basically a data library with a lot of tools for researchers who want to go deeper. With that, thank you for listening, and I'm happy to turn it over to Laura.
Okay, thank you so much, Sunil. And I too want to thank Sally Gifford for all of her work in getting us to this day. A lot of work behind the scenes, Sally. Um, so we have a couple of people who have used the raised hand function. And if you would just submit your question in the box at the lower right of your screen, that would help us get to it. Sunil, thank you so much. A number of questions have come in, and I think I'll sort of parse them out based on the studies. And we'll start with the SPPA study, the participation study. Um, One question is, how can you noted that not all states are represented in the data. Is there anything that the states and regions can do to help promote this work or promote response rates? How is the data collected? And in the future, is it likely that we'll see more states represented in the data?
So that's our aim with the 2017 survey, and it's coming up, folks. I know it seems like well, I guess it's technically 2 years away, but we're already planning we will be planning for the next big data collection for the survey with the U.S. Census Bureau. And we're trying to find a way to, in fact, get more states on board. Unfortunately, it isn't a matter of promoting the survey to states or to residents in those states because if people who take what's called the current population survey, which is essentially has a very high response rate across the country, will be receiving our arts questions as a supplement to that. So unfortunately, there's no kind of advanced marketing we can really do. But I will say that what we can do is what we're working on actually as we speak is working with the Census Bureau to see if through some statistical methods we might do some modeling that will enable us, even with the existing data, to come up with more reliable estimates, predictive using predictive methodologies to figure out what if we can do this for every single state. Can't promise anything at this stage, but it is something we're in active conversations with the Census Bureau on right now, as I said. But the next best bet is, in fact, the 2017 survey. And let me just say, again, the reason for not having every single state in the mix, although we do, again, have great national and regional representation, is because of the sample size. So essentially, every state has to be surveyed to the extent that its full diversity is accounted for. And so California, for example, is very well represented. But we do need to find ways with the Census Bureau to see what can be done to get deeper. And I just want to say, in terms of the usages for the states, I would hope that getting a sense of maybe not how one state is doing relative to another neck and neck is not necessarily the point, but rather to understand what are some pockets, even regionally, for some of these activities. What are hotbeds for these kinds of arts activities? And we know that in aggregate. And to the extent that perhaps programming can be made to align with or uh, address or respond to some of the data points that we see, like, for example, the active maker community or arts creation that's going on in the South that we had not seen before in some of these surveys, may in fact be harnessed, we hope, for future initiatives. But I'm happy to talk more about that if people have questions. I will say that on our website, the regions I gave you were U.S. Census regions, not necessarily the regions that we associate with regional arts organizations or state arts agencies. And for example, I referred to East, North, Central. Some of you may have been scratching your heads. That was Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, and Indiana and Wisconsin. Now, that's not what I would normally, that's not the term I would use to describe those states, but that's what the U.S. Census Bureau uses. West, North, Central is Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and so forth. And that's all on our website as well.
Great. Thanks, Sunil. We have another kind of related question, and you've kind of addressed it in a couple of different ways, but I want to be specific. With the participation study, you did talk a fair amount about electronic media. One question has come in, which is how is the NEA measuring new types of arts participation? So I guess the question is, how often do we have an opportunity to influence the questions that are being asked in the survey about new art forms?
Well, I get to drop a news flash for you, Laura, too. Is that we are going to be actively seeking input from stakeholders and also our internal stakeholders, our fellow, in my case, it's a privilege to work with Laura and other directors of various arts disciplines within the NEA, and we'll be consulting them actively as we refine the questionnaire for 2017. We do that every few years when we revise the survey, but this time I think we want to go even deeper because this is the first time, the 2012 survey is the first time we were so extensive. So whether you're talking about poetry slams or film festivals or things that we just never asked about, we have, I believe, touched on almost every. I dare not say everything because there's always a new art form or a genre emerging somewhere, but very and broadly speaking, we've covered a lot of ground with that survey. But now we almost have to do the reverse job: is look at it and say, what do we really need to know? And can we trim this survey a bit because it'll actually, I think, be even more useful as a meaner kind of survey instrument. Right now, it's got a lot of data from about various types of art forms, and are we getting the best bang for our buck in this particular survey? So we will be consulting the field and you, Laura, and others as we answer that very valid question.
Great. Thank you very much, Sunil. And questions are coming in fast and furiously. So I'm probably not going to field these specifically by type of study, but I'll still try. In the motivation and barrier study, is any of that data available by state?
No, that was one. If you noticed, I did not. And in fact, this gives me a chance to redress something. Just to clarify, that one is not available at the state level. That is purely a national survey, and we do hope it's useful because it speaks directly to attendance at live performing arts and visual arts venues. And I think that to the extent that we do anything in the area of audience development, or actually moving from just documenting who's going to what kinds of activities, which is what the first survey does, to getting at why and what can we do to bolster those numbers and help organizations improve those numbers. I'm very hopeful that that second survey, the second report, can be used by people for that purpose. Now, the thing I wanted to correct or redress rather is I forgot to mention at the end of my the last bit I gave about the Arts and Cultural Satellite Account, the Department of Commerce work. We are actually in the process of looking at, can we do this at the state level? Can we get to all states to know essentially what is the contribution of arts and culture in that state to the gross state product, comparable with the gross domestic product on the national level? And I'm very hopeful we'll be able to do something here. We're in a pilot with the BEA this year, actually, and we're looking at workers, we're looking at amounts of contributions of GDP to the gross state product, and what are those industries in those states. So we hope, and before long, we'll have more data there on the economic side.
Thank you, Sunil. And I'll follow up on the question on the economic data, the BEA data. There's a question: what is the nature of the art that is exported? Is it mostly popular media, film and music? Is it broken down as to the source?
Yeah, that's actually one of the so-called issue briefs, which has a table, I believe, on our website. But from memory, I do know that, yes, a lot of it is, in fact, movies, video, and in fact, some handiwork, jewelry. We don't, for example, so you know, our concern was to track the creative the creative services used to generate arts and cultural products. In very rare cases, the distribution. So, for example, we counted bookstores. We counted, if you will, musical instrument shops. We did not count jewelry stores. So Zales or Kay or something did not show up in our account, but the lapidary work that was used to create that item was. So the jewelry itself, the export of those services, the manufacturing of jewelry, was actually a surprisingly, I think, high export value for us, as was silverware and various things that involved artistic work in the creation. So I would say it is largely popular in that sense. Kinds of artwork was getting exported. I'd have to go deeper to find out what did we report about performing arts or specific kind of art form that we're accustomed to tracking through our surveys.
Great. Thank you very much, Sunil. Again, in the participation study, are you counting raw numbers in terms of participation counts or as a percentage of total or population by state?
So we are actually looking at the percentage of the state. And so in general, with our arts participation surveys, we look at the rate of participation, the share of all adults in that geographic area. So that's what we've been doing there. And I will just say, sorry, Laura, even though there's a tendency to want to rank these things very highly in terms of, one state is doing, quote, better because it has a higher rate of arts participation, shouldn't forget that in many cases, the so-called low-ranking states actually have very large counts of people engaged with those activities. They just may not be as high a share of the general population in that state.
Great. Thanks for that clarification. I think this was in the motivations and barriers, I believe. The question is whether we're able to break down the art lesson information for young people. How much of that is in school? How much of it is out of school? And in terms of the category of 18 to 24-year-olds, were you surveying them at the time they were in school or currently?
So we actually can break that out further to your last question first. We can break out further whether 18 to 24-year-olds were in school or not. I believe there's a variable in that census survey where we can get at that, but I'm not 100% sure. I can check. But to know that, to the point of in school or out of school, yes, our full report, and this is again the Survey of Public Participation in the Arts report rather than the other one. It has in there a lot about the kind of art form in which people either got lessons or classes in school or out of school. And one thing that was new to the 2012 survey is we actually asked about learning through any other means. So we asked about things like going online to learn or being self-taught or even passing on a family tradition or a cultural tradition. So we really were expansionist, if you will, in the survey. I will say that some things I do remember relative to in school or out of school or even formal or in school or out of school or even classes or lessons or some other means was that filmmaking and dance were two where you didn't see very high rates of in-school work classes or lessons. A lot of people were learning those art forms, if you will, through other means. And that would make sense given what we know about filmmaking or video making. But interestingly for dance too, dance also was, I think, the art form in which most number of people were likely to have learned it outside of school. So there's that kind of data as well.
Great. Now we have a question about whether rural arts participants report different barriers than metro participants.
Yes, and that again, I apologize for not having that at my command here, but it is in the report. If you look at the General Social Survey report, the one called When Going Gets Tough, which is again on our website, arts.gov, it does get into metro versus non-metro, if I'm not mistaken, to the extent it can. Again, it was nationally representative, but we couldn't go down into states, but we do have metro, non-metro, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. You also, let's see, earlier mentioned the relationship between education and cultural participation. And there's a question as to whether there's research underway to test those relationships.
So we actually have a lot of historic research data about arts education ending up time and time again as the most significant predictor of, for example, attendance in the arts. What I would like to see is a more robust analysis of arts education as it may contribute to other ways of participating in the arts. We don't have a lot about arts education as it may speak to creativity. We don't have a lot about art making and other forms, or even how it relates specifically to media participation or consumption of the arts through media, for example, or even creating through media. So those are some frontiers, if you will. I do believe we have pretty sound data about. It could always be better. I think in an ideal world, we'd want a longitudinal study where you track the same people over time, so you could actually know over a generation or two. You can know how to what extent is or how important in the long run the final analysis was they're having attended as a kid or they're having access to arts classes or lessons as a kid. But from what we know from cross-sectional data, which is what this all is, we have good reason to believe that arts education and arts exposure at an early age have a lot to do with whether someone attends later in life.
Great. Thank you very much. Sunil, we have another question. I'm not sure which study the questioner might be referring to, but generally there's a question about where does arts venue data come from?
So we asked people when they answered that they had attended a music, dance, or theater performance in the last year, and also if they said they'd attended a visual arts exhibit in the last year, we asked them where they saw those things, and we basically gave them. It was kind of a multiple choice kind of option thing where you could say if it was more than one, then they would give us more than one venue. And in fact, we went through a list of those kinds of venue types, and we asked about restaurant, nightclubs, bars. We asked about places of worship, schools, because again, if you remember, a lot of the attendance survey data questions were largely about non-elementary school, non-high school kinds of venues. And I think that was because when the survey was developed way back in '82, there was an effort at really getting at what was then seen as the so-called professional or even community arts movement outside of school-based performances. So we kept those questions over time. But anyway, we have a variety of questions on venue, which we ask the person who recalls that they attended an arts event. And that again is available. Those data are available on our website, showing you what share of adults attended what kinds of venues.
Okay, great. Another question. Do you have any insights into how other researchers are using this data? And do we capture those research reports or efforts that come from the data that we've released?
Well, we could always improve in the capture of that, and I would actually make an appeal here, since I have the ears of state arts agencies and others. If you can, please and many of you have done this already or continue to do this, please let Laura know, and she can funnel some of those to me whenever you get wind of a report or data point. So I didn't plant this question, but I'm happy you asked it because we want to know about how are researchers using this beyond those that we are tracking, and where you find these being used even for policy reasons or other. And so it's great to even in the small number of respondents you had for your survey, Laura, to see that these are some tangible uses here. I will also say that two of my favorite examples. So California, the Irvine Foundation has actually done their own version, if you will, of the SPPA, and because they want to know about, in California, a very diverse state, want to know about some of the art forms that may not have been captured through even our survey. They asked the questions differently and they added a variety of other questions. And I think they'll be reporting their results fairly soon, actually next month, if I'm not mistaken. So that will be interesting because we've seen that they've tried to mirror the SPPA in some respects, but in some ways they've made it a point of departure for their own local or statewide kind of efforts. And we've seen other places use these data and adapt these questions in their own surveys. So that's one way they're being used. Also, the NEA has a research grants program, and for the last 3 years or so, we've been encouraging researchers to look at these data and other data sets to mine knowledge about the arts value and impact. So we have seen some studies come out of that using these data sets through our own grants program. And again, we're happy to, and we have some of those posted on our website as well. So we're happy to share and also to collect examples from you.
Great. Can you give a little bit of sense of how the BEA research is different from other economic impact research studies
Well,
that
first,
states are
sure.
familiar with?
Right. So BEA, I would just say, very, very conservative in the sense that it has, standards of accounting practices that are essentially global, or it abides by global practices, and it also promulgates standards. And the ways they look at measuring arts and cultural industries, it's interesting because they actually start at the very, very basic level in an organic way almost. They look at goods and services first. They look at a long list of goods and services pretty much by every industry in this country that's generated by every industry, categories of goods and services. And then working with us, we went and picked out those goods and services that could be deemed arts and cultural products. And there's more definitional stuff in the guide that accompanies our survey, our account, which is on our website again. But working from that, it's sort of a bottom-up approach. So working from those goods and services, we then constructed, correlated those to the industries, then took those industries, and that was our arts and cultural collection of arts and cultural industries that form the account. Many other state and cities and places that do economic impact studies will first look for those industries and try to figure out what are the industries we want to take note of in our state and measure the impact. And it's just a different methodology, different approach for one thing. And secondly, the data sources are very different. Many of those kinds of economic impact studies rely on their own surveys of establishments, businesses in the area, maybe the restaurants next to the arts venue, and maybe even self-reported data from the arts organizations that are part of this promoting these services. Whereas the BEA data is largely coming from either other census data or Department of Labor data, or in some cases industry sources. And they get these data at a very fine microscopic level that we unfortunately can't have access to because we're not in the BEA. But then they report up to us and give us and find ways to use that data to funnel through this account and tell us what the total value added is to GDP. So I would just think of this as value to GDP versus, so in other words, the final economic value of these goods and services, not all the peripheral goods and services that come around it. They do count supplies, supplies into the account, like supplies for particular arts and cultural production, but they're not counting a lot of peripheral activities like I just named restaurants or travel and tourism kinds of things that would be incidental to the actual activity of engaging with the arts through spending.
Great. Well, I'm going to ask my own question here, and that is to sort of tee up for the states and regions. What are some upcoming NEA research things you have on the table? Where's research headed in the near future and down the road?
Well, I'll just name 2 or 3 quick things. One is with the Survey of Public Participation in the Arts. As I said, we'll be doing 2017. I won't say refresh, but we'll try to definitely make it as relevant as possible while retaining some trend data, or as much of it as we can. And that's where we will have some kind of consultation process to do that. And hopefully we can get a little deeper geographically to more states and maybe find a way to do that. The other one is the Bureau of Economic Analysis work, which of course, as I said, is also undergoing a process to see whether we can do this at the state level. And Laura's been a great partner there, and I'll consult her a lot more when we get closer to developing this with the Bureau of Economic Analysis. We also have some other things in the pipeline. We are doing a report on creativity, the arts, and the brain based on a workshop that was held last year at the Santa Fe Institute involving cognitive neuroscientists, neurophysiologists, and people to talk, and artists and arts organizations to talk about how the arts may really what happens in the brain when creativity occurs, and to what extent is arts emblematic of that. And so there's a lot of kind of research I'll just admit is a little further from my own field of expertise, but it will be interesting, and we hope that'll lead to something interesting, a good report in the next few months. And then finally, I just was referring at the end to a lot of these data resources, and we're trying to find more exciting ways, and we're always open to suggestions from you all about ways that you would like to see these data formatted or presented to you to make the most use of them. We're looking at interactive data visualization and other ways to promote the data on our website, so stay tuned for that as well.
Great. Well, I think we've gotten a good set of questions, and I think we've responded to all of them. There was a final question about whether this information will be available online. And yes, indeed it is. We will be posting both the webinar and the PowerPoint online, so we'll be sending out a link to it. I want to thank my colleagues here, Sunil Iyengar and Sally Gifford, who's stage right, my stage right, for being so supportive of the state and regional constituency and for this for participation in this webinar today, and thanks to all of you who are on the line. And if there are any questions that come up afterwards, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me or Sunil directly. Thank you so much, and with that, we will adjourn the webinar. Thank you.